The 2015 BTCC title decider will arguably go down as one of, if not the greatest title deciders in British touring car history. Going into the final race of the season, two drivers were in the hunt to win the title. One being the Team BMR Volkswagen of Jason Plato, who was looking to win his third BTCC title, and the other being the Team Dynamics Honda of Gordon Shedden, who was looking to win his second BTCC title. Going into the final race, Shedden led the championship by 12 points ahead of Plato, but after a frustrating race 2, Shedden would start way down the field, whilst Plato, thanks to finishing 6th in race 2 and thanks to the race 3 draw, would start on the front row, alongside his longtime rival and Shedden's teammate Matt Neal. But before we see why this was a great title decider, let's go through the previous meetings to see how we got to this point. The 2015 season would mark the second season of all the teams using the NGTC regulations, after the S2000 regs were slowly phased out between 2011 and 2013. There was a lot of hype surrounding the 2015 season, now that packed crowds had returned to the circuit, something that hadn't been seen since the Super Touring era. There was also a lot of hype surrounding the driver lineup for 2015, as there were a lot of car and driver changes that made everyone take notice. One of these being Andrew Jordan, who despite winning the title in 2013 when his family ran Eurotech team, decided to leave the team after his father Mike sold Eurotech to Jeff Smith to join 888 Racing, who competed for the title the previous year with Jason Plato and with the MG6 GT, which they were using again in 2015. As for Plato, on the other hand, he ended up leaving 888 Racing at the end of 2014 and moved to the independent Team BMR, who were using the Volkswagen CC and were using the same engine that 888 Racing were using for the MG6 GT, which was the standard Toka engine, developed back then by Swindon Engineering, as opposed to M-Sport like it is nowadays. However, he wouldn't be the only BTCC champion moving over to Team BMR, as after winning the title with West Surrey Racing the previous year, Northern Ireland's Colin Turkington decided to leave the team after 2014 and take up a new challenge, as for the first time in his BTCC career, he would drive a front-wheel drive car as opposed to a rear-wheel drive car that he had been used to since he made his BTCC debut in 2002 and even on his return to BTCC in 2013 after a brief stint in other touring car categories following his title win in 2009. The pair would also be joined by Aaron Smith, who had an impressive season in 2014, and Warren Scott, who definitely got the drive on merit and not because he owns the team. Spoiler alert, he's crap. In terms of West Surrey Racing, Rob Collard remained at the team but would be joined by Sam Tordoff, who like with Jason Plato had also moved over from 888 Racing, and a returning Andy Prio, who was using a different livery to the one Collard and Tordoff were using. As for Team Dynamics, whilst they would keep the same lineup of Matt Neal and Gordon Shedden, they would end up changing cars, as after a disappointing 2014 season with the Civic Tourer, they would end up reverting back to a hatchback, and specifically the Honda Civic Type R FK2. For the start of the 2015 season, there would be 27 cars on the grid. However, it would increase as the season went on, as a result of Motorbase deciding to join the season late on in order to use the first half of the season to focus on development. The first meeting of the season would take place at the Indy layout of Brans Hatch, with Andy Prio, despite not being in the championship for a number of years, taking the first pole of the season, and it looked like the three-time World Touring Car champion had lost none of his speed. But in the race, he would tumble down the order, finishing race 1 in 9th. Instead, it was his teammate Rob Collard who took the first win of the season, with it looking like West Surrey Racing could take the fight without Turkington. Smith finished second, whilst teammate Plato was behind him in third to ensure the last two spots on the podium were taken up by BMR drivers. Race 2, however, would be a different story, as thanks to the new rule where the Race 2 grid was determined by the fastest laps in Race 1 as opposed to the results of Race 1, Collard started down in 4th, whilst Gordon Shedden, who started in 3rd, would go on to take the Civic Type R's first ever win in a photo finish with Andy Prio after assuming the lead from Jason Plato, who retired thanks to a puncture. In race 3, Honda would once again take victory, but this time it would be Matt Neal, who after a close fight with the MG of Jack Goff would come through to take his first win of the season, ensuring a strong start for Team Dynamics. The second meeting of the season took place at the national layout of Donington Park, and after a frustrating Brans Hatch Indy, Jason Plato put the disappointment of that weekend behind him to record his first win of 2015 and his first win with his new team, whilst teammate Colin Turkington would follow in his footsteps in race 2 to record his first win with Team BMR and his first win with a front wheel drive car. But after having 5 different winners in the first 5 races, Matt Neal brought everyone back down to earth in race 3, as after starting down in 6th and after just avoiding a near collision with Aaron Smith down the Craner curves, Neal, after passing Collard with 3 laps to go, took his second win of the season, ensuring Team Dynamics won 3 of the first 6 races, while Shedden made it a 1-3 for the team, with Andrew Jordan splitting the pair of them in the MG. Moving on to Thruxton, and after a strong start to the season, people were expecting Honda to be strong around the Hampshire circuit, given how quick they were in previous seasons around Thruxton. And in race 1, that looked to be the case, as despite missing out on pole, Shedden was able to dispose of pole sitter Aaron Smith, who bogged down at the start, to take his second win of the season, leading home a 1-2 finish in front of Neal. But despite this, they were not able to win either race 2 or race 3, as Jason Plato in the BMR was able to show that the Volkswagen had pace around the fast swooping Thruxton to take his second win of the year, while Shedden finished in 3rd and Neal retired thanks to damage to his front suspension after a collision with Aaron Smith. However, in race 3, it wouldn't be a Honda or a Volkswagen that would take victory, nor would it be a BMW. Instead, it would be the Mercedes of Adam Morgan, who after drawing pole position for that race, would go on to take only his second ever win by a few seconds ahead of the MG of Andrew Jordan, who was still yet to record a victory with his new team. Moving over to Oulton Park, and after a failed venture on the international circuit the previous year, the series switched back to the island layout from 2015. And with the change going down very well, Jason decided to celebrate this by winning the first 2 races of the weekend, becoming the first driver to take 2 weekend wins in 2015. A Honda would finish second to him in both races meanwhile, with Neal finishing second in race 1 and then Shedden finishing second to Jason in race 2. Moving on to race 3, and after a tricky start to the season, WSR, after winning at Brans Hatch, would finally get their second win of the season. But this time, it would come courtesy of Sam Tordoff, who after an amazing charge in race 3, and after a close fight with both Andrew Jordan and Matt Neal, would come through to take his 3rd ever BTCC win, and his first with BMW, after a frustrating start to the season, whilst Shedden and Plato finished behind the top 3 runners in 4th and 5th respectively. The halfway point of the season saw the championship visit Croft, and it also marked the debut of Nicholas Hamilton, younger brother of then 2-time world champion Lewis Hamilton, becoming the first ever disabled driver to compete in the series. Nick would drive an adapted Audi S3 Saloon, and he was entered in the championship as a guest driver rather than a full-time driver, meaning he wouldn't be eligible to score championship points. Elsewhere, after a frustrating return to the BTCC, Andy Priya would finally get some good luck and grabbed his first win in the series since 2003, leading home a BMW 123, closely followed by the Honda of Gordon Shedden. This would then set the scene for the rest of the weekend, as BMW grabbed all 3 wins at Croft, with Tordoff winning race 2 and Collard winning race 3, showing that a corner might have been turned in BMW's fortune. But this would end up being a false sense of hope in the next meeting at Snetterton, as the team would end up struggling again around the Norfolk circuit, fighting with the likes of Motorbase, who returned to the championship from the 6th meeting, with Matt Jackson and James Cole after missing the first half of the season. The weekend would end up being a strong one for Colin Turkington, as in a season where he looked to be lost in the wilderness, the reigning champion would win the first 2 races of the weekend, whilst teammate Plato continued his strong showing by grabbing a 3rd place in race 1 and a 2nd place in race 3. Speaking of that race, and after a frustrating season, MG would finally get their first win of 2015, but it wouldn't come courtesy of Andrew Jordan. Instead, it would come from his teammate Jack Goff, who after drawing pole for the third race would end up converting the pole to take his first ever BTCC win, just holding off a challenge from ex-MG driver Jason Plato. Shedden meanwhile would end up having a torrid weekend, only gathering 3 points across the 3 races, with him finishing 14th in race 1 after qualifying down in 16th with power steering issues, retiring in race 2 and being unable to recover in race 3, finishing down in 24th but still able to grab the fastest lap point. Next up was Shedden's home race of Knockhill in Scotland, and after finishing 5th in race 1, with Collard going on to win that race, Shedden would bounce back in race 2 to take his 3rd win of the season, putting his championship back on track. In race 3 though, it was Matt Neal who would take the victory, after passing Adam Morgan on the penultimate lap thanks to the Mercedes driver collecting a bit of loose tyre barrier that allowed Neal to close up. Plato finished 6th, whilst nearest rival Shedden finished 2 places behind in 8th. Back-to-back meetings at Northampton were next, with Rockingham being the first to host. The meeting would start off poorly for Jason Plato, as he would end up finishing way down in 27th after breaking his suspension on the first lap, which the team was somehow able to repair to ensure Plato could finish the race. As for Shedden, and after finishing 2nd in race 1 to Matt Jackson, who would take Motorbase's first win since their return, he would follow that up with a victory in race 2 that allowed him to take the lead in the standings, whilst Plato charged his way through the order to finish 7th. This in turn gave him a favourable position on the grid for race 3, and JP would take full advantage of this to take his 5th win of the season, ensuring that he was 6 points behind Shedden, who finished down in 8th. The penultimate meeting of the season and the 2nd Northampton meeting would take place at the national layout of Silverstone, and it would be a meeting that would see neither of the top 2 win a race, with Matt Jackson and Andy Prio winning race 1 and race 2 respectively. Race 1 would end up being a disaster for Plato and would end up putting a bit of a dent in his championship, as on the final lap of the race he would sustain a puncture which dropped him down to 25th. Shedden meanwhile would take the final podium spot in race 1 before finishing 4th in race 2, whilst Plato, just like at Rockingham, made a great recovery to finish up in 7th. However, unlike Rockingham, he wouldn't win the 3rd race, as teammate Turkington would instead take his 4th win of the season to ensure he kept his title hopes alive going into the finale. Plato meanwhile finished in 4th, while Shedden finished just behind him in 5th, meaning going into the final meeting at the Grand Prix layout of Brans Hatch, Shedden led the championship by 23 points ahead of Plato, with 5 drivers still having a mathematical shot at winning the title. However, realistically, it was between Shedden and Plato, and it was looking like Shedden would be the strong favourite to win the title. However, little did we know at the time that the final meeting at Brands Hatch GP would turn out to be an absolute classic. The final meeting of the 2015 British Touring Car Championship took the teams back to Brands Hatch, but this time for the popular Grand Prix layout. For the final meeting, Alain Menu returned to the championship with Team BMR, replacing the injured Warren Scott, and with 2 of his teammates in a title fight, he could be there to play a supporting role along with Aaron Smith. During qualifying, it would be Matt Jackson who would take his 3rd consecutive pole position in the Motorbase Ford, whilst Gordon Shedden lined up in 4th, Colin Turkington was in 5th, whilst Jason Plato was behind the pair of them in 6th. However, in the race, it would be Turkington who would be the highest placed title contender, as whilst Matt Jackson would go on to win the race, Turkington would come through to finish in 4th, whilst teammate Plato was also able to beat Shedden to finish 5th. But with Shedden finishing in 6th, it meant that Jason was only able to reduce his lead in the standings to 22 points, meaning Shedden was in prime position to wrap up the title before the final race. However, race 2 would end up being a disaster for Shedden, as not only would he start down in 13th due to his race 1 lap time, but he would also drop down in the race thanks to damage that he sustained during a mid-pack battle, and would end up finishing out of the points in 19th. As for Plato, he would start in 8th and would gain 2 places to finish in 6th, bringing the gap down between himself and Gordon Shedden to just 12 points heading into the final race. And with Plato starting 2nd for race 3 thanks to the race 3 grid draw, and with Shedden down in 19th, Plato was in prime position to snatch the title away from Shedden, with Gordon starting down in 19th. If Gordon wanted to win his second title, he would need to carve his way through the order. At the start, Neil, who started on pole, made a mistake at turn 1 and allowed his arch-rival Plato to take the lead. Going into turn 2, and Tom Ingram would get tagged by both Dave Newsham and Matt Jackson, sending him into the gravel, whilst Jake Hill joining in sympathy, tagging the front of Tingram's car, forcing both to retire and bringing out the safety car, adding 2 laps to the original race distance of 15 laps. Shedden had gained 3 places at the start and was up to 16th, but with Plato leading the race, he needed to gain more places if he wanted to win the title. The safety car would peel into the pits at the end of lap 3. However, it wouldn't be long before it would get called out again, as at the restart, Stuart Lyons would run wide out of the final corner, beaching his car in the gravel, bringing an end to his race and adding another lap to the original race distance, meaning the maximum of 3 added laps had already been used. Shedden, as a result of Lyons' retirement, wasn't able to gain any places at the restart. However, he would be able to gain a place during the safety car, as just in front of him, Alain Menu sustained a rear right puncher, forcing him into the pits and moving Shedden into the points. However, this was still not enough for Shedden to win the title, as with Plato out in front and also getting a bonus point for leading a lap, Shedden needed to finish 5th for him to win his second title. The safety car peeled in at the end of lap 6 and Plato once again ran away out in front, whilst Neil, thanks to a mistake out of the final corner, would lose 2 places to both Jack Goff and Matt Jackson. With Neil unable to help out Shedden in terms of getting Plato, Gordon had to do all the hard work on his own, and he would start to do that, as along with Newsham beaching his car out of the final corner, Gordon would gain 2 more places to move up to 12th before the safety car was brought out again to clear Newsham's car from the final corner. Once the safety car came in at the end of lap 8, Gordon wasted no time disposing of Jeff Smith at turn 1 to move 1 place away from the top 10. Then, towards the end of the lap, Gordon would catch up to the huge train that was formed by second place Jack Goff, and taking advantage of a little error from Sam Tordoff, Shedden would get great traction coming out of the penultimate corner to get himself into the top 10. Then, on lap 10, Andrew Jordan would make a mistake at turn 3, allowing Shedden to get right onto the back of him. And seeing no point in fending off the position in case he lost time to the cars in front, Jordan put his indicator on and allowed Shedden to move up to 9th. Then, a couple of corners later, Shedden moved up to 8th, taking advantage of Andy Prio, who had just been overtaken by Aaron Smith. It was at this point that concern was raised about Gordon Shedden's brakes, as whilst trying to chase down Aaron Smith, his front brake discs were glowing at an alarming rate, and this led to fears that Gordon's brakes could explode at any moment. But this didn't deter Shedden at all, and knowing what was at stake, and with Plato also grabbing the fastest lap point, 5th place was now more important than ever. At the end of lap 11, Shedden would perform the switchback manoeuvre on Aaron Smith at the final corner to move up to 7th place and 2 places away from the required 5th place. In front of him, teammate Neil would take advantage of the battle in Goff and Jackson to pass Jackson at the top of Dingledale to move up into the final podium spot. Meanwhile, at the beginning of lap 13, Shedden would get a good run on Rob Collard down the pit straight to outbrake him around the outside at turn 1 to move up to 6th and 1 place away from being in a championship winning position. His next target was Adam Morgan. However, with only 6 laps to go and with the gap being relatively big to Morgan, it looked like it would be an impossible task. But luckily for Shedden, he had someone in that group who could help him out, as with 5 laps to go, Neil, after closing up to Goff, would dive down the inside of the MG driver down at turn 1, but would end up making contact, allowing Shedden to make it 3 wide up towards turn 2. Neil would end up going deep into turn 2, pushing Goff wide and allowing Morgan to move up to 3rd. But this wouldn't last long for Morgan, as Neil will attempt to dive down the inside of the Mercedes driver at turn 3, but would end up tagging the back of him instead, forcing Morgan to correct a slide. Goff tried to take full advantage of this, but Neil would shut the door, as he himself would go down the inside of Morgan at turn 4 to move back up to 3rd, and in doing so, allowed Goff to repass Morgan at the exit of turn 4 to move up to 4th. This, as a result, allowed Shedden to close up to the back of Morgan, and with just 4 laps to go, Shedden would make his move on Morgan at turn 1 and moved up to the required 5th place, meaning as a result, Shedden was in a championship winning position. But despite this, Shedden was not done yet, and with him being on the back of Goff, he could sense that there was more on the table. With 3 laps to go, Goff would make a mistake at the exit of turn 4, but was able to defend the position at the next corner. Towards the end of the penultimate lap, Neil would back off to try and aid his teammate in trying to overtake Goff. Starting the final lap of the race, Neil would defend the inside heading down the pit straight, but in doing so, allowed both Goff and Shedden to move past him into 3rd and 4th respectively. Going up to turn 2, and Shedden would go down the inside of Goff, but Goff would hang it around the outside, ensuring the pair were still side by side heading down to turn 3. Heading out of turn 3, the pair would remain side by side, whilst Neil would hold off everyone behind him to ensure no one could get close to Shedden. Goff would outbrake Shedden at turn 4 to hold on to 3rd. Shedden would try again to get past Goff around the outside at turn 5, but Goff once again held on to the place, and at this point, Shedden, realising that he was in a championship winning position, decided not to fight Goff any longer. As Jason Plato rounded the final corner to win the final race of the season, Gordon Shedden from 19th on the grid crossed the line in 4th to become the 2015 British Touring Car Champion. After a disappointing race 2, which saw him out of position in race 3, and with it looking like he was going to lose the title, Shedden carved his way through the field in a champion's drive, and the relief in his face after the race said it all. Shedden would win the championship by 4 points ahead of Plato, with Plato once again missing out on a title, adding to the list of seasons he missed out on the title, including 2006, 2007 and 2009. Little did we know at the time that this would turn out to be the last time Plato would fight for a title. As for Shedden, he would go on to retain his title the following year after a close fight with Sam Tordoff, before losing his crown in 2017 to the up-and-coming Ash Sutton, who would do what Team Dynamics were unable to do, which was win the title in an estate car. Shedden would leave the BTCC after 2017 before making a brief return in 2021 for 2 years with Team Dynamics before the team took an hiatus in 2023 before then merging with Accelerate from 2024. The 2015 finale will go down as not just one of the best ever title deciders, but also one of the best ever BTCC races, and that in large was down to Shedden's amazing drive to win his 2nd title. And in my opinion, it's a better title finale than the 2019 one that Colin Turkington won after Dan Camish lost his brakes. If you have never seen the race before, then I highly recommend that you watch it on the ITV website, as the race is available to watch from there, or if you live outside the UK, try and watch it with a VPN. The 2015 title decider, one of the greatest races and title deciders in BTCC history.